and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso. Today we're going to look at a proposed implementation guide issued by FASB. It is about leases, one of the top common requests in the GASB world right now on questions for implementation. It's a bit of a change in how we think about leases, and as a result, people obviously have been submitting questions about them. So we're going to see some of the questions and the types and what are the things people are asking about. So a little bit of background, this was issued back in February, 2-week vacation does that, and comments are due at the end of April. So as I said, GASB 87 makes a lot of changes to lease accounting, and so this Q&A is really to assist people who are looking at implementation and what we can do about it. So it is 49 pages long. It has 80 questions just on one standard, GASB 87 leases, and 3 really awesome illustrations. So I would highly recommend that if you are a government or an auditor who works with a government, that you take a look at those 3 illustrations. Some of the things that they are going to be focusing on, scope. There is a lot of questions on scope. Leases for $1. Not a lease, because if you look at the definition of a lease, you have to have an exchange or exchange-like transactions, and $1 probably isn't going to be, make it to that. Easements in the government world are probably not leases, because in the government world, they're typically permanent, and the definition of a lease is for a period of time. Substitution rights, I think this one is another interesting one. Not an issue. FASB has a whole thing on substitution rights. GASB says they don't factor in as we go through this, so long as you have the right to use an asset. We don't care if they substitute it out. They do also talk about the exception in the standard for power purchase arrangements, supply contracts, biological animals. So they hit on the gas and power purchases. They talk about zoos and what do they mean by land. So some really good examples in that area for people who were trying to understand, well, is it the machine? Is it the power? What exactly am I leasing? In terms of the lease term, they answer a lot of questions. I think the first one there, certificates of occupancy, are really interesting, right? Because it gives you the right to use the asset. If you don't have the right to occupy the building, then the lease term really can't start. So I think that you have to go back to that non-cancelable right to use as being the key area. They also talk about holdover periods and what they really focus on and who has the right to cancel. If it's the cancellation by one party, that's then not going to be included in the lease term, right? If someone can just cancel, and then if you need both, then you have to look at it. So they do kind of differentiate in who has those cancellation rights. Same thing, bargain renewals are included in there depending again on, does that include increase your reasonable certainty of your renewal? And then they have quite a few questions on that, as I said, cancellation, but also penalties. And the penalties are not necessarily going to be considered depending on how the cancellation is written. So we want to make sure that we're always looking cancellation first. They do talk a little bit about short-term leases, but the answers are very, very consistent. They really mean maximum possible term. So they give a lot of different examples, and in everything they basically say no, because the maximum possible term exceeds 12 months. So when they look at options to extend, you have to consider them, and they were very, very consistent in that area. In terms of lessee recognition and measurement, they did talk about capitalization thresholds and the fact that, while they don't specifically address it, they do recognize that they're out there. They do give some examples of how CPI works, because remember, we have a typical general rule of not remeasuring. So they give some examples of how you would do that with some actual numbers, which I loved. They do hit on the lease and non-lease components and make sure people understand what they should be breaking out there. They give really good examples related to variable payments. I think that was probably my area that I got a lot out of. And what do they mean by variable payments that are in substance fixed? And some good questions in that scenario. In terms of the asset, they do talk about payments before lease commencement, and I thought that was a really interesting area. Basically, until your lease commences, they are prepayments, and then when your lease commences, you would actually reclass them into the asset, but you can't put them into an asset before you actually have the right to use. So going back to that same concept. And then there is a permission related to composite depreciation. On the lessor side, they do talk about initial direct costs and give some examples there. Subcontracts of leases that are accounted for as an investment. So if you have a lease and you're accounting for it as an investment, it's not under 87. But what if you then lease or subcontract out that lease? How does that play in? So that was a really interesting one. They do talk about multiple component and regulated leases. I think the example is an airport that is using, that you're getting two different things where you have a regulated lease is only a portion of it, and how you split that. Again, focusing on those in-substance fixed variable payments. So they do talk about that in the lessor side. They confirm again, just like you would expect, no straight line amortization. And they do give us some accounting. If your deferred inflows would be adjusted below zero, what would be the appropriate accounting? They have a lot in here. As I said, 80 questions. So those are the ones that are common to pretty much everybody. They do talk about contracts to transfer ownership. They have some note examples, lease incentive, multiple components, contract combinations, modifications, terminations, sale leaseback, lease leaseback, and intra-entity lease questions as well, just to give you the variety of things that they're going to address in this IG. So I highly recommend you take a look at them and give feedback. Is there questions that are missing? Is one of the questions answers surprising to you or counterintuitive to you? And let GASB know. GASB is probably dying for some feedback from you. So I would take that opportunity if you're not too busy in April. I know April's not a great time, but if you have the opportunity in April to provide feedback, I'm sure GASB would be greatly appreciated. So, all right, with that, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me on the Genuine Learning blog, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.